In recent weeks, I have been most deeply touched by your wonderfully kind and thoughtful good wishes for my health, and in return, can only continue to serve you to the best of my ability throughout the Commonwealth.
In this video, we're diving into one of the most shocking moments in modern royal history. Imagine waiting your entire life for something, finally getting it, and then losing it in less than 2 years. That's exactly what happened to King Charles, and what it reveals about the crown will surprise you. So stick around until the end, because we're breaking down every detail of this royal shakeup. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happened behind those palace walls. It's a story that has left people around the globe absolutely stunned. King Charles, at 76 years old, made history, but not in the way anyone expected. He became the first British king in modern times to lose a major royal title so quickly after receiving it. The title we're talking about? Duke of Edinburgh. This wasn't just any title. It was his father's most treasured honor. When Prince Philip passed away in April 2021, this special title went straight to Charles, his oldest son. It was meant to keep his father's memory alive. But here's where things get interesting. Just 1 year and 5 months later, when Queen Elizabeth died, Charles became king. The moment he took the throne, something automatic happened. All his old titles, including Duke of Edinburgh, disappeared. They got absorbed back into the crown. On official documents, it looked like a simple rule. But in real life, it felt like something much deeper. The son who had spent decades trying to step out from under his parents' giant shadows ended up losing the very title that had meant everything to his father. This couldn't have happened at a worse time for Charles. His time as king, though still new, was already filled with problems. There was the mess with Prince Andrew's scandals that wouldn't go away. People weren't sure how to feel about Queen Camilla now being called Queen Consort. For a king trying to show he could lead, losing such an important symbolic title almost seemed like a bad omen. It felt like a warning that no crown, no name, and no royal family is above being questioned. While all this drama unfolded at the main palace, something quieter was happening at Windsor. Prince Edward, Charles's younger brother, stepped into the spotlight. In 2023, he was officially given the Duke of Edinburgh title. To some people, it looked like a nice gesture. To others, it seemed like the royal family was admitting they needed to change their own rules just to stay relevant. So what's really going on here? Is this just how royal tradition works? Or is it a sign that the monarchy is struggling to keep its balance under a king who brings controversy wherever he goes? Stay with us, because what we're about to reveal shows the real truth behind those 517 days. It's a truth about power, about legacy, and about a royal family that's still dealing with ghosts from the past. To really understand how we got here, how one of Britain's most famous titles just vanished, we need to go back to the sad and complicated times that marked the end of the Queen's reign. This story doesn't start with an official announcement. It starts with death. For more than 70 years, Philip had represented duty and strength. He was the man who never complained, never broke down, and never caused drama. When he died, even though everyone knew it was coming, it left a huge empty space. No one, not even Charles, seemed ready to fill that space. Within days, following royal rules, Philip's titles automatically went to his oldest son, who was then the Prince of Wales. On paper, everything went smoothly. But emotionally, it was like an earthquake. For Charles, getting the Duke of Edinburgh title was complicated. It wasn't just his father's name. It was everything his father had built through decades of public service, military work, and quiet discipline. Philip had helped shape what the modern monarchy looked like. He believed that being royal should mean being useful, not just decorative. Wearing his title meant taking on that same work ethic and all the expectations that came with it. But underneath all the ceremonies, the royal family was already changing. Queen Elizabeth's health had started getting worse. The palace, which had always been good at keeping secrets, was preparing for a big change. And Charles, who had been waiting to be king for 70 years, found himself stuck between mourning his parents and wanting to finally lead. When the Queen died in September 2022, the world watched as everything appeared to happen perfectly. The announcement of the new king, the serious funeral, the promises that things would continue as usual. But behind all those rituals, something else was happening. When Charles became king, All his existing titles, including Duke of Edinburgh, automatically merged into the crown. They weren't taken away or cancelled, they just stopped existing as personal honors. In royal language, the son had finally become the ruler, but the man had given up his father's legacy. That's where this story becomes more about feelings than rules. Because for Charles, this wasn't just about following procedures. It was about who he was as a person. His whole life, people had compared him to his parents. They measured him against their perfect behavior and strong morals. He was the son who showed too much emotion, the man whose private mistakes became public embarrassment, the prince who married for love but lost the nation's heart. Becoming king didn't erase those opinions, it made them louder. The situation was almost painfully ironic. While Charles struggled to figure out how to be king amid ongoing controversies, from Prince Andrew's unsolved disgrace to people's uncomfortable acceptance of Queen Camilla as his wife, the title that had symbolized stability and respect quietly moved on. In March 2023, Prince Edward, the late Queen's youngest son, officially received the Duke of Edinburgh title. For many people, it felt like things had come full circle. Philip's legacy was now with his most humble child. The decision was celebrated publicly, but privately it said a lot. It showed a difference in how people saw things. There was a king who still faced questions about his leadership, and a brother whose quiet reliability made him one of the monarchy's most trusted members. While Charles's approval ratings went up and down, Edward and his wife Sophie quietly earned admiration for their humility and hard work. And so in this story of a title lost and given again, the modern tensions in the royal family came into focus. Image versus honesty, formal rules versus real feelings. The monarchy had figured out how to keep its symbols, but could it keep its soul? That question hung in the air as the cameras moved away. Because underneath all the fancy coats of arms and official seals, those 517 days between getting the title and losing it weren't just about a title. They were about a man who kept searching for his father's approval, only to discover that some legacies can never truly be inherited. By the time King Charles took the throne, the British monarchy was already fragile. People's respect had turned into curiosity, and curiosity had turned into doubt. Queen Elizabeth's passing didn't just mark the end of an era. It brought up a question nobody wanted to ask out loud. Could her son really command the same respect she had built over 70 years of grace and self-control? For Charles, the throne came like a gift wrapped in thorns. He wasn't stepping into an empty position of power. He was stepping into a shadow that stretched across the entire 20th century. And in that shadow, everything he did or didn't do seemed to cause arguments. His critics pointed to Prince Andrew's ongoing scandal as a stain that hadn't been cleaned up. Andrew's connections to Jeffrey Epstein and the lawsuit that followed had permanently damaged the royal brand. While Charles publicly distanced the institution from his brother, he never completely removed him from the inner circle. Andrew was allowed to keep living at Royal Lodge, a decision that made people angry. One newspaper wrote, "You can't modernize the monarchy while protecting its disgraces." Then there was Queen Camilla, once the most hated woman in Britain, now standing next to the king with her own crown. Her transformation from royal mistress to queen consort was both a love story and a source of resentment. To some people, it showed forgiveness and strength. To others, it was a betrayal of the late Princess Diana's memory. The coronation photos, with Camilla in her ivory dress next to a visibly tired king, became a test of the public's feelings. People saw what they wanted to see, either redemption or rewriting history. Meanwhile, inside the palace walls, sources whispered about tension between Charles and Prince William. The heir, now 43, had become the monarchy's real public face. Young, careful, good with media. It was William who handled environmental campaigns, charity projects, and global appearances with easy confidence. In contrast, Charles's speeches often wandered between passion and complaining. His tone was more academic than inspiring. Even people who respected his intelligence wondered if he could ever connect with ordinary people the way his mother or his son did. And yet, despite his flaws, Charles carried a strange determination. He believed that time would eventually prove his vision was right. His reign focused on streamlining, fewer working royals, smaller palaces, smaller budgets. But the way he did it often felt cold. What he called efficiency, critics called cutting corners. What he saw as duty, others saw as being disconnected. When the Duke of Edinburgh title was officially given to Prince Edward in 2023, the public conversation shifted again. For the first time, commentators started openly comparing the two brothers. One was the king who couldn't shake his controversies. The other was the quiet achiever who earned respect without demanding attention. One columnist in a major newspaper wrote, "If the crown were based on character rather than blood, Edward might have been the man Britain needed." That feeling reflected a deeper worry. Charles, despite his lifetime of preparation, still felt like a temporary monarch, a bridge between the past and whatever future William would one day represent. And so the story of those 517 days took on a new layer of meaning. It wasn't just about losing a title, it was about losing control of the story. Every move Charles made, from ceremonial gestures to personal choices, seemed to invite debate. Was he a reformer or a relic? A modernizer or a monarch still trapped by the ghosts of his past? The irony, of course, is that the monarchy survives precisely because of those contradictions. It fascinates people because it is flawed, human enough to make mistakes, yet special enough to endure. Charles's reign, for all its controversies, has become the mirror through which Britain examines its own discomfort with privilege, tradition, and change. And perhaps that's what makes this chapter so compelling. Not the loss of a title, but what it reveals about the world's oldest institution trying to stay relevant in the world's newest age. In the weeks after Queen Elizabeth's funeral, Buckingham Palace seemed to fall into a strange kind of quiet. The grandness remained, the soft glow of chandeliers, the echo of footsteps across marble. But the feeling of the building had changed. Where there had once been continuity, there was now uncertainty. And at the center of it all was a king, trying to show authority while fighting to prove he deserved it. Charles's coronation, though filled with ceremony, was curiously understated. The public celebrations felt restrained, even polite. They lacked the waves of national love that had come with his mother's milestones. Crowds still lined the streets, yes, but their cheers carried a faint edge of curiosity rather than devotion. They were watching a transition, not a triumph. Inside the royal household, conversations turned increasingly practical. Queen Camilla had become, in every visible way, the palace's stabilizing force. She understood Charles's moods better than anyone. His tendency to overthink, his flashes of impatience, his quiet insecurity. He's not his mother, she reportedly told a longtime aide once, and he shouldn't have to be. But he can't seem to forgive himself for that. Those close to the couple said Camilla often played the role of both partner and protector. She handled difficult phone calls, calmed him down after negative headlines, and coached him before speeches. Still, her presence remained divisive. Some royal insiders privately admitted that public sympathy for her would never be universal. "The nation respects her," one said, "but it never fell in love with her." While Camilla managed the king's emotional side, another dynamic was emerging: the growing influence of Prince William. At 43, the Prince of Wales had become the monarchy's public engine, leading initiatives, attending events, representing the institution abroad. His approach was measured, cautious, almost corporate. There were whispers that the palace staff, particularly younger aides, found it easier to work under William's structured leadership than Charles's unpredictable bursts of energy. "He's the one they're preparing for," said one political correspondent, "and everyone knows it." Tensions, though unspoken, occasionally surfaced. One evening at Clarence House, after a long strategy meeting about the monarchy's public finances, Charles reportedly snapped, "I've been doing this longer than you've been alive, William. Don't lecture me about efficiency." William, as always, remained calm, but the silence that followed was heavy. Camilla, sensing the danger, diffused the moment by changing the subject. "We'll all need to be efficient," she said softly, "if we want this family to survive." Meanwhile, the outside world continued to test the king's composure. Reports of Prince Andrew's financial entanglements and Harry's continued criticism of the institution kept the tabloids busy. The monarchy's public image, already fragile, seemed to shake with every headline. Yet Charles refused to engage directly. His strategy was silence. Let the noise burn itself out. To his defenders, that was wisdom. To his critics, it was weakness. Behind closed doors, Charles's attention often drifted to his father's legacy. He spent long hours in his study, surrounded by Prince Philip's old photographs and naval memorabilia. Friends say he was haunted by the idea that he would never match Philip's stoic dignity. The irony was bitter. The title his father had carried for decades, Duke of Edinburgh, had already been passed to Prince Edward, the youngest and least controversial of the Queen's children. Edward's quiet rise became one of the more understated victories in the monarchy's recent history. When he and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, were officially granted the title in March 2023, the public reaction was overwhelmingly warm. Their reputation for humility and hard work, no scandals, no drama, had made them almost the model royals of a tired institution. In Edinburgh itself, locals embraced them warmly. At last, one Scottish journalist wrote, "The title has returned home." Charles, by contrast, faced a different tone from the press. Every decision he made was framed as a test of his leadership. Was he decisive enough? Too distant? Too academic? When he reduced the number of working royals to cut costs, newspapers accused him of shrinking the monarchy's reach. When he spoke about climate policy, critics mocked him as the Green King preaching to the world while flying private. But perhaps the most telling sign of his uneasy reign came from within the palace itself. The staff who had once served Elizabeth often spoke wistfully of the old rhythm, the effortless balance between restraint and warmth. The late Queen didn't need to prove her authority. One long-serving staff member said, "She simply had it." Charles, by contrast, seemed to be in a constant state of proving himself. Yet those who knew him well insisted he remained deeply committed, even obsessed, with ensuring that the monarchy endures beyond him. "He knows his reign will be shorter than his mother's," said a senior advisor. "He's trying to build a bridge, not a monument. And that perhaps explains the quiet sadness that surrounds King Charles. He is a man both defined and limited by history, a king whose every decision feels like a reaction to the ghosts of those who came before him. His father's discipline, his mother's calm, his son's rebellion. All of it echoes in the corridors he now walks alone. The loss of the Duke of Edinburgh title after only 517 days may have been a technicality, but symbolically, it captures the essence of his rule. A man who inherits greatness holds it briefly and then must let it go. No matter how he tries to shape the modern monarchy through reform, restraint, or resilience, one truth remains unshakable. The crown he wears was forged in expectation, and it may never fully belong to him. And within that realization lies the true tragedy of King Charles. Not that he lost his father's title, but that he may never escape his family's shadow. While the king projected calm through carefully worded statements and rehearsed appearances, inside the royal family, the mood was anything but peaceful. The monarchy had weathered wars, abdications, divorces, and death, but rarely had its unity felt so unstable. The transfer of the Duke of Edinburgh title to Prince Edward may have seemed like an act of grace, but to some within the palace, it was also a quiet admission of where trust and credibility truly lay. Prince Edward and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, had long been the dependable pair, discreet, hard-working, and unthreatening. When the title was finally given to them in March 2023, their modest acceptance struck a chord with the public. "They're everything the monarchy should be," wrote one major newspaper. "Steady, humble, and scandal-free." The couple's unassuming approach provided a stark contrast to the turbulence swirling around the king's other relatives. At Windsor, Prince Andrew remained an uneasy ghost of royal disgrace. His retreat from public life had done little to repair the damage left by the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. Though he no longer represented the crown, his presence in the family's private gatherings was a reminder of how one man's choices had nearly undone the dignity of the entire institution. Charles had reduced his brother's official role, yet allowed him to keep living at Royal Lodge, a decision that angered critics who viewed it as favoritism. "It's a moral contradiction," one parliamentary commentator said. "You can't preach accountability and still protect the unaccountable." If Andrew's fall symbolized corruption, then Prince Harry's distance represented rebellion. His move to California, his tell-all book, and his frequent criticisms of the institution had split public sympathy. To many Britons, he had become the self-exiled son who wanted to tear down the family he'd once been born to serve. To others, especially younger viewers overseas, he was the voice of honesty, exposing what they saw as outdated royal hypocrisy. For King Charles, these two men, his brother and his son, embodied the dual wounds of his reign: scandal and separation. Both were products of choices he could not control, but outcomes he was blamed for nonetheless. Behind the palace doors, staff described Charles's frustration as obvious. "He's torn between blood and brand," said one insider. "He wants to be a father, but he must behave like a CEO. Queen Camilla stood firmly by him through it all. Her decades of surviving public hostility had given her a practical resilience that Charles often lacked. "Ignore the noise," she reportedly told him. "Do the work and let history decide." Yet even she faced whispers that her influence protected Andrew. That her image rehabilitation campaign cost more than it gained. Though the tabloids had largely softened toward her, the memory of Diana's tears still haunted public perception. Meanwhile, Prince William navigated the widening gap between generations. Privately, he urged his father to be more decisive, to distance the crown from family drama once and for all. Publicly, he maintained the image of unity, appearing with Charles and Camilla at select events while quietly shaping his own vision of the future monarchy. Professional, media-savvy, and emotionally intelligent, some aides began calling him the Invisible Hand, the stabilizing force preparing Britain for a life after Charles. The tension between father and son simmered just beneath the surface. During a private strategy meeting at Sandringham, witnesses described a heated discussion about the monarchy's public image. When Charles defended his slower, more traditional approach, William allegedly replied, "Then the monarchy will move without you." It was a sharp statement, softened later by reassurances, but it revealed the generational split between a king rooted in duty and an heir molded by pragmatism. Even Edward and Sophie, loyal as ever, sensed the divide. They had become the quiet diplomats of the family, bridging conversations, easing friction, keeping ceremonies smooth. It was Edward who visited Andrew discreetly after each controversy, and Sophie who reached out to William's wife Catherine, offering her steady friendship amid media storms. Together, they became the monarchy's conscience. Gentle, unassuming, but indispensable. Through it all, Charles continued his daily routines with near-religious precision. Early morning papers, correspondence, official documents, briefings. Yet those close to him said his moments of solitude were growing longer. Sometimes late at night, he would walk through Clarence House's gardens, pausing beneath the elm tree planted by his father decades earlier. One aide recalled finding him there after midnight, hands behind his back, whispering, "He made it look so simple." In many ways, that single sentence captured the burden of his reign. The monarchy was still standing, but the scaffolding that held it together, family loyalty, public trust, quiet admiration, had begun to rust. The king could control titles, residences, and rituals. What he couldn't command was affection. And so, the royal family now existed in a fragile balance. A brother in disgrace, a son in exile, a wife under scrutiny, and an heir quietly preparing for the next act. The crown had survived its storms. But one question lingered in every marble corridor of Buckingham Palace. How much longer could it survive its king? By the middle of 2024, the monarchy's struggle for balance had become an unspoken national conversation. For all its glittering formality, the royal family now resembled a house quietly straining under its own history. King Charles, still recovering from bouts of ill health, appeared increasingly isolated within the very walls that once symbolized stability. Every appearance was examined closely. Every tremor in his hand or hesitation in his voice became headline material. In the public imagination, he was a monarch carrying two burdens: the weight of expectation and the shadow of doubt. He waited 70 years for this crown, one news anchor noted, and it seems to grow heavier with every passing month. Within the palace, the tone had shifted from triumph to endurance. The staff, who had once served Queen Elizabeth, described the new era as nervous, cautious, slightly brittle. Charles's insistence on running the monarchy as a leaner, modernized institution often clashed with the traditions that gave it legitimacy. He wanted fewer working royals, smaller expenses, less pomp, but each change felt like chipping away at something sacred. He wants to reform the house, said one historian, but he may end up hollowing it out. Even loyalists admitted that his reign lacked the unifying warmth of his mother's. Elizabeth had ruled by silence and consistency. Charles ruled by conviction and complexity. He was intellectual, emotional, and at times thin-skinned, qualities that humanized him but did little to strengthen public faith. Meanwhile, Prince William had become the monarchy's quiet center of gravity. Polls showed he and Princess Catherine commanding more than twice the public approval of the king. Behind the scenes, Queen Camilla continued to serve as Charles's shield and sounding board. Her days were consumed with smoothing edges, both his public image and private temper. Insiders say she bore the criticism stoically, even when whispers persisted that the crown fits her more comfortably than it does him. But she knew better than anyone the fragility of public forgiveness. Every stumble, every headline that revisited the ghosts of the 1990s reopened old wounds. The rest of the family played their parts carefully. Prince Edward and Duchess Sophie, now firmly established as the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, had become the monarchy's quiet workhorses. Their events across the United Kingdom were rarely glamorous, but deeply effective. In Edinburgh itself, their connection was almost personal. Crowds cheered them not as celebrities, but as familiar faces. To many, they represented what the royal family once stood for: service without spectacle. In contrast, Prince Andrew remained invisible yet inescapable. His ongoing presence at Royal Lodge continued to haunt the palace's reputation. Critics argued that his financial dependence on the crown contradicted the king's message of accountability. "You can't clean the institution," one commentator wrote, "if the stain lives inside the house." Then there was Harry, whose life in California had turned into a paradox. Free, yet forever defined by what he'd left behind. His occasional interviews and book updates reignited tension each time, reminding the public that the royal split was emotional, not logistical. For Charles, it was a quiet heartbreak. "He never stopped being a father," said one staff member. But the crown doesn't allow for personal repair. By late autumn, the contrast between the palace's appearance and its reality had grown stark. Royal processions still gleamed under torchlight, but inside, exhaustion hung like incense. The king's personal motto, "Serve with heart, reign with reason," began to sound like a prayer more than a plan. Observers couldn't help but notice the symbolism. The man who once lost his father's title after 517 days now risked losing something far greater: the nation's confidence. Not through scandal or defiance, but through quiet erosion. A reign weighed down by history, expectation, and the relentless gaze of a world that no longer believes crowns are untouchable. And yet, for all its fragility, the monarchy endured, just as it always had. Because survival, not perfection, is its oldest tradition. As winter descended on Britain, the monarchy found itself in a season of reckoning. The fancy carriages, the military salutes, the balcony waves, all the pageantry that once defined national pride now carried an undercurrent of unease. King Charles, at 76, had become both symbol and subject of the royal dilemma. How long can an institution survive when its crown sits on such uncertain ground? Public debate flared again after a major newspaper published a headline that cut through the pomp: "A monarch of conviction or a king out of time?" The article reflected what many Britons whispered: admiration for Charles's intellect and dedication, but a doubt about his charisma and command. Even the Prime Minister addressed the subject delicately in Parliament. The monarchy has always adapted to the moment. His Majesty's challenge is not to preserve it as it was, but to keep it alive as it must become. Across the Atlantic, American networks aired documentaries re-examining Charles's reign, blending criticism with curiosity. Pundits called him the eco-king, the philosopher monarch, even the man who waited too long. But perhaps the most cutting comment came from an Australian columnist who wrote, blessed. Charles wanted to modernize the monarchy, but in the process, he stripped it of its magic. Inside the palace, that line reportedly stung. For all his flaws, Charles had tried to evolve the monarchy, to make it leaner, less theatrical, more responsible. But every cut he made to the institution's luxury felt like a cut to its mystique. He turned the royal family into something closer to a corporation, one veteran reporter said. Ethical perhaps, but less enchanting. Even Queen Camilla could feel the tension. She had spent years proving her worth, earning grudging respect from newspapers that once vilified her. Yet, she remained aware that much of the nation's affection for the monarchy still belonged to ghosts. Diana's shadow lingered, not in scandal, but in sentiment. Every headline comparing their legacies reopened the quiet wound of a monarchy still haunted by its own humanity. In contrast, Prince William had become the monarchy's insurance policy. Politicians and commentators alike praised his sense of duty, his balance of warmth and restraint. He's learned the art of royal silence without inheriting his father's defensiveness, said one columnist. William represented the monarchy's hope for survival. Steady, uncontroversial, and refreshingly modern. But that also underscored the uncomfortable truth. The institution's future popularity depended not on the king, but on the promise of the next generation. Beyond Britain, Commonwealth nations were beginning to question their ties to the crown. Canada, Australia, and Jamaica all renewed debates about independence, with local leaders hinting that the time for symbolic monarchy may be ending. Yet surprisingly, the decline of royal power abroad didn't come with hostility. It came with nostalgia. "We wish him well," said an Australian senator. But the world's changing faster than crowns can keep up. Meanwhile, within Britain, polls revealed something even more nuanced. While fewer people expressed loyalty to the monarchy, many still believed the family, even in its dysfunction, reflected the country itself. Flawed, proud, enduring. "They're like us," said one London cab driver. They've got their arguments, their scandals, their heartbreaks. The only difference is they do it in front of the world. And maybe that's the paradox that keeps the monarchy alive. The same traits that make Charles controversial also make him relatable. He's not the perfect ruler his mother was. He's the imperfect one his generation produced. In an era that values transparency and emotion, perhaps imperfection is his only true advantage. There's a strange beauty in that. The king's story, losing his father's title after 517 days, grappling with scandal, trying to reinvent an ancient institution, is less about power than persistence. It's a reminder that leadership, royal or not, is not about being untouchable. It's about staying upright when history itself seems to want you to fall. And as commentators debate whether Charles will be remembered as a reformer or a placeholder, perhaps the real lesson lies in humility. The monarchy's strength has never been its grandeur. It's been its ability to reflect the contradictions of the people it serves. Proud yet uncertain. Moral yet flawed. Enduring yet fragile. So as the lights dim over Buckingham Palace and another royal day fades into history, the question isn't whether the monarchy will survive. It always does. The question is what kind of monarchy it will become. A relic of nostalgia or a mirror of modern struggle? Before we wrap up, I want to hear from you. What's your take on King Charles and this whole situation? Was he a necessary bridge between old Britain and new, or was he simply born at the wrong time? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Your perspective matters and helps us understand how people across the globe view royalty today. If this deep dive into royal history gave you a new perspective, hit that like button. It really helps us bring you more content like this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next video where we uncover the hidden truths and untold stories behind the crown. Because sometimes, the real story of a king isn't written in history books. It's written in the eyes of the people who are still paying attention. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.